these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold these truths.
We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Hey guys, welcome back. Got another great episode for you because that's just what we do here. And I know you know that because that's why you're listening, and you've probably given me 5 stars on Apple ratings already, and if you haven't, well, maybe you should. I really don't know what that does for me, but people seem to think it's important, so maybe a nice comment too. Today we have Rob Smith with us. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Rob, you and I met hanging out with at Turning Point events. Very impressed by you. You've got your own media company. You're now an author. You've got a book coming out next week. You travel around the country to college campuses, speaking on what I would call cultural issues in politics. And you've got just a really interesting background as well. So what's the name of your new book?
So the name of my book is Always a Soldier: Service, Sacrifice, and Coming Out as America's Favorite Black Gay Republican. So the America's Favorite Black Gay Republican thing, that's kind of the tagline I use to describe myself. It's funny. There's an element of humor in it. And then I think that when people get past the joke, we can really start talking about what does it mean that I'm a Republican and I have these identities, and what does that mean in politics in 2020? But yeah, that's the book. So the book is about 70% memoir, my time spent in Iraq, my time spent in the military, and about 30% of talking about, political and cultural issues that are going on right now.
Were you always Republican? Was there a time period when you started identifying that way?
No, I was not always Republican at all, Dan. I was a good little liberal, I would say the red pill for me happened, and if your listeners don't know that terminology, the red pill is when people start leaning more towards conservative ideals and ideologies. And my red pill came a couple of different ways. First, I read a book by Ann Coulter called Adios America. And that book is all about immigration, both legal and illegal, but particularly how illegal immigration is really damaging lots of parts of this country, particularly the African-American community. And it made me think deeper about those issues in a way that I hadn't before. And I would say over the past couple of years, I'm very open about the fact that I did not vote for President Trump in 2016. I hated Hillary Clinton. I wasn't a fan of what the Democrats were saying. I didn't feel like they were speaking to me, but I didn't necessarily feel like Republicans were speaking to me as well, even though I was becoming more conservative leaning.
Yeah.
And after the president got elected, I kind of took a step back and started looking at the results and the results of what were really happening. And I said to myself, this stuff is really good. And also the left likes to own Black people. They like to own Latino people. They like to own gays and lesbians. They like to say that if we are not in power, your life is in danger. They will say this verbatim.
Yeah.
And I started to realize that my life was not in danger. And in fact, in many ways, my life was getting better. And I had to take a real hard look at what I believed and why I believed it.
No, that's so it would happen during Trump's presidency. So this is a very recent phenomenon, you transitioning. Were you politically active before that? I think you were, right?
Yeah, I was very politically active on the left. So this book, Always a Soldier, I served in the military during the Don't Ask, Don't Tell years, which was basically it barred gays and lesbians from serving openly. And after I got out of the military, kind of moved to New York, got involved a little bit into activism and writing and speaking and all that stuff. I did that in support of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So I was political. I spoke out a lot about that. I was arrested at the Obama White House protesting the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law. And, with the help of a lot of Democrats and not, quite a few Republicans as well, we were able to get the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law repealed. So now gays and lesbians can serve openly in the military. And I'm not an egomaniac, but I know that I had more than a little bit to do with that. So I was politically active before.
Right.
And I think I started shifting away from everything that was going on the left because things started getting more and more insane. And I started taking a hard look at my military service and what it meant to me. And one thing about my military service is that it engendered a love of America in me that I'm not sure would have been there had I not served. And I started seeing a lot of sort of anti-American, anti-authoritarianism, anti-military. A lot of this stuff started bubbling up on the left, and it just became a place that was no longer for me.
And yeah, I mean, I write about like why I think that is. It's because the left is obsessed with identity politics, which really isn't that indistinguishable from victimhood politics, because the whole point of identity politics is to pit one group against another, and one group has to be an oppressor and one has to be an oppressed. And so this manifests into victimhood ideology. And if there's a victim, then there has to be an oppressor, and then you have to look for it. And I think then the ultimate oppressor eventually becomes, as you move through groups, as you move through institutions, it eventually has to be America itself and the symbolism of America, the American flag and all that. And I think that explains, sociologically speaking, why we see what we see today.
Yeah, I think it does too. And what I started to notice about, and especially as I broke out of that sort of leftist realm, and I talk about this a lot in the book because I really do talk about, coming out as conservative and Republican, and which I did about 2 years ago at this point. And the amount of hatred, the amount of vitriol, I mean, it really is something. Because there really is this idea, and I don't like to, there's a lot of Black conservatives that kind of talk about, the plantation politics and the plantation stuff, and I'm not a big fan of talking about that or speaking like that. But there was a sense of you are ours, and you're not supposed to be there because they hate you and they will ultimately destroy you. So come back here where you're safe, even though none of what you really believe doesn't align with us. Just because you are Black, just because you are gay, just because you are both, you are supposed to be here. And it's really quite wild to be on the receiving end of.
It's so strange. And so this is actually a good spot to transition into what I just saw on the internet yesterday. It came from, you probably know what I'm talking about. Am I screwing this up? It came from the African American Museum, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's strange on so many fronts. And so basically this is a poster that was published by the museum, and it's titled Aspects and Assumptions of Whiteness, White Culture in the United States. And you're like, okay, what is this going to be about? And the subtitle here is White Dominant Culture, or Whiteness, refers to the ways white people and their traditions, attitudes, and ways of life have been normalized over time and now considered standard practices in the United States. And since white people still hold most of the institutional power in America, we've all internalized some aspects of white culture, including people of color. So, I mean, the premise is obviously strange right from the get-go, is that culture is based on skin color. Now, that's not true ever in human history, just ever. Like, that's just not true. I mean, so it's like right off the bat, the premise is totally false. I mean,
it's outrageous.
It's completely outrageous.
It's crazy. I'm looking at this right now. Okay, so
but yeah, I mean, this and then get into the actual cultural elements, because they're like, wait a second, this is like, you're telling me Black people don't believe in this stuff? Some of this is really good stuff.
At it right now.
Yeah.
It's rugged individualism, self-reliance. Apparently, self-reliance is a white thing. Believing in the family structure, that's a white thing. Objective, rational, linear thinking is apparently a white thing. Protestant work ethic, hard work is the key to success. If you didn't meet your goals, you didn't work hard enough, then I had no clue that these were white things. I thought that these were people things. I thought that this was what you do to achieve success.
It's so strange, isn't it? It's like simultaneously highly insulting and racist, but also like, wait a second, you did a really good job actually capturing what I write about in my book quite a bit, like just good things. And of course, like the naysayers are like, oh, this is because you're white. Well, I'm like, no. Have you not met black people also? I mean, this says Christianity is the norm in the religious section. It's like the black community likes church. Are you kidding me?
Do, and they will tell. So when you say these things, Dan, they will say, oh, it's because you're white, because you've never done anything. And a couple months back, I testified in Congress, in AOC, and all of her cronies were there. And I just told my story. I said, I came from very little in Akron, Ohio. I decided to join the military at 17 years old. I deployed to Iraq. I get out and I've got, this really amazing life right now. I work really hard, but I really enjoy what I'm doing. And I'm a bootstrapper. Like, I am a bootstrapper because I've done it, and I am not particularly special. And I think that anybody could do this in a lot of different ways. They hate the idea so much that anybody of any color in America can hold on to these ideals and become successful, because it negates everything that they are trying to push on us. And when I say that, I mean the left. They're trying to push this idea that people are not individuals, right? So it's this individualism versus collectivism. They try to push the idea that just because somebody is born with a different skin color, that they are permanent victims throughout their entire life. And if you go through life with that frame of reference and with that state of mind, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, exactly.
And the difference between my frame of mind, now that I've come out as conservative and now that I've decided to really internalize these principles, is that I've seen success and I've seen a lot of different things, whereas before I was always, number one, waiting on somebody to give me an opportunity, or number two, when I failed, when I fell short, when I did not work hard enough, I thought it was always racism. And it's a really destructive way to go about living your life.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it removes agency from the person. I mean, personal responsibility, apparently, which is just these crazy white principles. It's a foundation of conservative culture for a reason. I think it's the basis, because it's about empowerment, and they can't have you empowered if they're always going to be. Again, the solution comes from the supposed cause. And this is what I mean by that. For Democrats, the solution to all problems is excessive government control, centralized, top down. We need as much intervention in your life as possible. We're your only savior. And if that's true, then it must mean that you're powerless. And so they have to define you as powerless. That has to come first before they can actually offer you this kind of saviorship that they do.
Yeah, and I mean, that's it. And for me, my transition, and it really became a point, and again, I talk about that. I break down a lot of different elements that sort of made me transition or come out as conservative, as I like to call it. I don't know if I coined it or not, but it's definitely something that I started talking about a lot. And it's really kind of coming out of that and realizing that it doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter how much money you have, doesn't matter what your skin color is, doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is, doesn't matter what your religion is. None of those things matter, because you always have the agency in your life.
Right.
And you have to go through life with that. And you're right about the fact that a lot of people on the left seem obsessed with this idea of removing agency from people. Just because they are whatever immutable characteristics that they have.
Right.
And I kind of fight against that. And the thing for me, which is the most fulfilling, when somebody's either said they pre-ordered my book, or they say that I gave them their red pill, or they say, well, I look at you and think that I can do it. And I'm like, exactly, that is the point. So we have a lot of, and we don't even have to say their names, we have some very, very successful bootstrapper stories of some very prominent political figures on the left. And they did it, but yet they want to pretend as if nobody else can do it, which is really insane to me. It doesn't add up.
I hear that all the time. It's very it's very strange to me. And I'm like, you live by the values that we say you should live by, and yet you diminish and destroy those values in public. And why? But I bet you teach those values to your kids because you love your kids. So it begs the question: why wouldn't you treat the American people the way as if you loved them, the way you love your kids? And it's ridiculous. Let's get back to your personal story. Well, did you want to say something?
No, not. I was just going to say, look, it's the easiest thing in the world. Dan, it's easy to lie to people, right? Yeah. It's easy to tell people what they want to hear. It's easy to tell people that they are not successful, that they are victimized, whatever, because of racism or whatever. And it's easy to remove them of their agency. And that is why there is such a difference between what these people say and how they live their lives. They will, we'll just get deeper into, they will say that we want to dismantle the nuclear family structure, but they were born and raised in a two-parent household. Their parents are still together.
Right.
They will be anti-capitalism. They will give $20,000 speeches railing against capitalism. And it boggles my mind. But yeah, let's get back.
Highly contradictory. Yeah. So you see yourself as a New Yorker now, but you grew up in Acton, Ohio. Akron, Ohio. You didn't perform, or you didn't attend high performing schools. You talk about how disaffected teachers would routinely come unprepared, counselors who didn't know what to do. So is that why you ended up? And then you ended up in the Army, joined the Army at age 17. So
at 17,
was that sort of an escape? Like what led to that?
It was an escape, and I talk about this like the first, I would say 20 or so pages of the book kind of get into that a little bit, but then we're right into infantry basic training, and we go into that. But yeah,
we'll do some vet talk here soon.
Oh yeah, the vet talk. So I'm from Akron, Ohio. I'm from West Akron, Ohio. You're talking about the city. I was not born in a suburb. The thing about me is that a lot of people that try to tear me down and discount my story, I think that they like to create a story about me in their heads that I'm some privately educated prep school kid from a two-family household, and I was making a lot of money, and this is why I would believe in these these beliefs. And I'm like, well, no, that's Obama. Okay, that wasn't me. And he realized that, the hustle was growing up in privilege and then telling people that they're victims. Yeah. So that wasn't me. I grew up in West Akron, Ohio. This is a city that's 98.6% Black. My middle school and high schools were very, very, very underperforming. And I say this a lot about my high school. I never say the actual name. If you Google enough, it'll probably come up. But this is a school that is to this day rated a D or an F by the Ohio public school system. Yeah. So this is the kind of education that I got in my middle school and high school years. Now, in my elementary school years, my mother did send me to a school across town. She used my grandfather's address to get me into that school. So I was in the quote unquote white school when I was in elementary school. And that came with a lot of different issues, but I actually did get a decent, elementary school education there. And I was actually learning, and I was actually a very high performer. And then, I came to these low performing schools where people were getting in the fist fights, and there had to be security and all of that stuff for my middle schools and high schools. And people didn't know what to do with the smart kid. I didn't play sports. I wasn't very athletic in high school. As a matter of fact, I was pretty heavy. So they didn't quite know what to do with me. So I graduated high school at 16 years old. And there was no next. There was no going straight into college. There was no nothing. There was just, I graduated.
So did you skip grades? How'd you graduate at 16?
Yeah, I
skipped, super smart.
I skipped a grade. Yeah, I skipped a grade in elementary school. I think I skipped like 5th grade or something like that. It was either, I think I went from 3rd to 5th or something like that. It was way back in the day. So look, I was a very high performing kid that was born into, a broken family structure. And that was around a lot of lazy administrators that didn't quite know what to do with me. So that is what it is. So I ended up. I
don't want to spend too much time on education policy, but since you've lived through it, and basically you're a product of school choice. Your family had to kind of force school choice there by actually moving. Obviously, by definition, school choice, the way conservatives push for the policy, would allow you to simply choose to go to that school. Is that something you're pretty passionate about, school choice, and what else though? I mean, what else? Because school choice is one thing, right? And that saves some kids.
Yeah.
But what about that other failing school that you spent all of middle school and high school in? You know, you could throw more money at it. Does that change it? I mean, what is there just cultural issues there? Is it the single parent households that, I mean, there's so many factors. And so what's your general opinion on this?
There's so many factors, and those things are cultural. I am a huge proponent of school choice because here's the thing. Then the biggest factor in high performing kids is how involved their parents are in their lives. And I think that school choice gives high involved parents in maybe lower income communities the chance to send their kids to a school that's actually going to pay attention for them. It's a chance for everybody to work together, right?
Yeah.
So when we talk about these very low performing schools, and in my middle school, my high school, they were very, very low performing schools. They were just people just getting shuttled from grade to grade to grade. I call them, they're little more than teenage daycare centers. I'm sorry. And it's controversial, but it's true. And the reason that these schools are so underperforming, it's not because of a lack of money. You and I both know that billions of dollars are thrown into these schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you have kids that are coming to these schools with uninvolved parents, from single parent family structures, from all of the stuff that happens, that is not preparing these kids to actually go in school and learn because there's so much else going on. You know, the state and the government can't intervene in that. You know, the state and the government cannot raise these kids.
Right.
So that's a cultural factor in that you have to start working on family structures, and you have to have involved parents. I was raised in a single parent household. My mother raised me. She was a very involved parent. She was very involved in my schooling and education. Even though I went to very low performing high school, I still did very well grade-wise. But I'll be completely honest with you, and this is something that I think that we should all do, that I've continued my education in my adult world because, you know, I am not very literate when it comes to the American classics, of literature, American cultural history, you know, just geography, things like that. I've had to teach myself because those schools were so poor.
Yeah, and then you joined the Army.
I did.
Was there like a moment where you're like, I'm going to join the Army? I mean, what the heck happened?
Okay, so I graduated high school at 16 years old. I was waiting tables at Denny's, wasn't living much of a life, still kind of like living in my grandma's basement. Not that I was some scrub, I was still granted only barely 17 years old. But I knew that there had to be something else, and there had to be a different way. And that's when I decided to join the Army. And I talk about this a lot in the book. And this is kind of embarrassing, but it is what it is. I talk about this in the book. Obviously, I was a gay teenager at the time. And I called the recruiting station, and the recruiter comes, and I'm telling you, I had a massive crush on this guy. It just is what it is. So I had a massive crush on this recruiter. And seriously, I had a massive crush on him.
When did you come out as gay? How long ago before this moment?
So look, I don't know that I knew what gay was.
Okay.
I knew that.
So were you not openly gay in high school?
I was not openly gay in high school. Absolutely.
Well, what do you think that would have been like?
I was coded as gay in high school, so I got a little teasing and bullying. I think being openly gay in high school would have been a little bit more than I could have taken on at that point.
Yeah.
So I was not openly gay, and I don't even know if I knew what gay was. I knew that as a teenager, the same way that most boys felt about girls, I was feeling about other guys. So that's all I knew. There wasn't a definition of it. And I didn't really come out as myself come out to myself or to my mother or anything like that for a couple of the years. So I had a massive crush on this recruiter. He's spending a lot of time with me, taking me back and forth. We would have lunches. We'd talk about what I wanted. And he presents this idea of the infantry. And my 17-year-old self is saying, wow, how cool, I get to shoot a gun. I get to go out and do camping and all this stuff like that. You and I both know that the infantry, it's a little bit more intense than that.
What year was this?
Oh God, now I'm going to age myself. This was in 1999.
Whoa. I thought you were, how old are you?
I am, oh my God, Dan, I try to keep my age to myself. I just turned 38.
Okay. I thought you were a little younger than that. Yeah, well, you age well. Yeah, good job.
Everybody does. Everybody does.
Okay.
Everybody does. So I go into the military. I go into boot camp, and it was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. This is infantry boot camp, mind you. I'm a pudgy, heavy kid, no sense of discipline, eat everything, no sense of physical fitness at all. And it broke me, and then it built me back up. And I had these two drill sergeants, and this is what, if anybody takes anything from this book, and this is what I get into the most. My two drill sergeants, self-described redneck, country drill sergeants, they helped me and they built me up by tearing me down, and it's a process. And so when I started, coming over to the conservative side, and I saw these people saying, oh, well, these rednecks, these Trump supporters, these whatever, they hate black people and they hate this and they hate that. And I would just have to look back at my military experience. I'm like, no, I knew these people, and that was not it. But it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. And I came out of it on the other side in no small part due to those drill sergeants and due to another drill sergeant that came in and learning that physically I could do this and learning that mentally and emotionally I could do this.
Well, but you do talk about experiencing some racism, derogatory, homophobic slurs as well. I mean, throughout your life, and so talk about that, but also relate it to the reactions we're seeing now with Black Lives Matter. Because I mean, and I guess my other question would be, police growing up in Ohio as a black teenager, what was that like? Is this narrative, a quarter correct, half correct, fully correct? What is it?
Okay, so racism and homophobia, absolutely, I've experienced it in my life, experienced it in the military. It was, so the homophobia aspects of the military, it was at that point enshrined in military law, because granted, don't ask, don't tell was still the law of the land. If I came out as gay, if I told anybody I was gay, if I was caught at a gay bar on a date or anything like that, I'd be kicked out. And so, I went into the military to find a path to a college education, to a better life, to all that stuff. So the homophobia was enshrined in law, right? And so, yeah, you get a couple of guys that call you fag every now and again, and it just is what it is. So that was the biggest aspect. The racism aspect, there was only one real sort of like overt thing that happened in Iraq. And I talk about that a little bit in the book, where somebody just actually like, oh, I'm from the South and those ends know their place there. And that's it within earshot. And I was like, holy crap, that's crazy. It had never been in my face that much before. And one of the other guys like, oh, you can't really say that here. So
yeah, the military is extremely diverse. Especially the Army, and the Navy,
Army.
Yeah.
And Dan, to this day, there are people. It's in the thing when the left gets so anti-military and they say, "Well, that's not a place for black people." Like, you have to understand, enlisted is 30% black. Most people who have never had a black boss in their lives will have their only black boss in the military. Because it's about rank and it's not about anything else.
It's a pure meritocracy, and it's, I tell everybody, even for a few years, the military is, it just sets you on a great path. Please do it. So were you there so you were in Kuwait, where you were 5 years, started around 98. So that means Afghanistan.
Well, we're 99 through 2004.
So were you in Iraq during the invasion?
I was in Iraq. I deployed to Iraq about 3 weeks after the invasion into 2003, and I was in Iraq for just under a year.
Wow. What part?
Yeah. I was in Kirkuk. So what happened was, So when I was in Iraq for the initial invasion, we flew into Kuwait and we convoyed up all the way from Kuwait through to Kirkuk. So we crossed the border and we were in a convoy for a good month before we hit a little town called Al Riyadh, which is about 45 minutes south of Kirkuk. So we went through Baghdad, we went through Samarra, we went through that whole thing.
Just a little road trip. Just a little road trip, nothing else.
Little road trip, not too
Where were you guys
crazy,
driving? Where were you guys driving? Not people think of convoys now, and we've got these giant RG-33s, huge armored trucks. They're like monster trucks. They're awesome. That's not what we had back in 2003.
Yeah, Bradley fighting vehicles.
Oh, well, those are pretty good too. Okay, you see, those are nice. So not the Humvees with no doors.
No, not the Humvees with no doors. Like some of the MPs were. So when I was around, the MPs were doing the Humvees with no doors. So
were special operations, yeah.
Yeah. So I had 2 jobs during the entire time. First, I was a mechanic, and then I went straight to an infantry unit. So I was an M249 machine gunner. Actually, no, I'm getting that backwards. At first, I was a driver. And then I drove for a couple of years. So I drove the Bradley fighting vehicle for a couple of years. As a matter of fact, in my deployment in Kuwait, that's what I did. And then after Kuwait, I got transitioned to a field team. And so then I was the 249 machine gunner. So during my time in Iraq, I was the M249 SAW machine gunner. So that baby was my best friend.
Yeah.
So we convoyed up there, saw combat not on the convoy, saw combat, I think 2 or 3 times when we finally got to Al Riyadh. And I talk about those combat situations in the book. And it wasn't so much that it happened during an actual mission that we were supposed to do, because we ran a couple of missions, but my unit was kind of always ran cleanup. So when we were in Samarra like a week and a half after there was this massive firefight, and we were going in to clear out this building, look for intel and all that stuff, and everything had kind of already happened. So when I saw combat, it was more my base got attacked. So our base of operations got attacked a couple of times. I talk about that in the book. And I talk about how I don't use real names in the book. Everybody that is not me is a pseudonym, because some of these guys are still serving and they don't need that attention. They'll know who they are if they ever pick this up. And I'm still in contact with a lot of guys that I served with. But I use pseudonyms just because, I don't need to be using people's real names and bringing them into any of this. But I had a squad leader in Iraq who he was looking for something to do, and he would take us out on missions that didn't necessarily need to happen. And a couple of those times is when we saw incoming fire, and he wasn't a great leader. And I talk about that situation a lot, because when you're a grunt, when you're a specialist, which is what I was, and you have this sergeant that is getting you into dangerous situations, that is exposing you, and he would expose us for no reason. And that stuff got contentious, and I get into that in the book. What do you say when you're a specialist and you have a sergeant that is exposing you and putting your life in danger for no real reason? Because those missions that he was taking us out on, those were not real missions. That wasn't real. That was him wanting to be, wanting to play soldier.
Yeah, once again, it's combat action ribbon. Yeah, that I've seen that dynamic play out before. In one of the tenets of leadership is you have to explain why. Your troops have to understand why. There obviously isn't a hierarchy in the military, and you can give orders just based on the insignia on your collar, but it's not real leadership. And eventually that when things really get hard, that hierarchy is not guaranteed to stand. There has to be mutual respect, and that mutual respect, one of the first things to do is simply explain why. Explain why we're doing this. You have to. We dealt with this in Afghanistan because I don't think we're doing anything we weren't supposed to by any means. These were real missions, but even then, guys are like, why? Really, why? We're getting blown up all over the place. There's IEDs everywhere. We're not so much worried about the people shooting at us. When they do that, they're just it's really just not that big of a deal. It depends on what part of Afghanistan you're in, on how good they are at firing and maneuvering. But in Kandahar, where we were, the danger was IEDs. And so, to the point where we wouldn't even fire and maneuver. Well, we would fire back, but we would not maneuver back because you never step outside of something that isn't cleared. And guys are like, why do I want to lose my feet? So it's hard on the psyche, and everybody just, they put their heads down and they deal with it, and we mitigate risk the best we could. But every once in a while, you get your face blown up, which is obviously what happened to me. But I was, and I could blame people for that, but I knew why I was there. Maybe that particular mission doesn't matter, but the overall mission does, and that's what I explained.
And I think, and honestly, Dan, what I really wanted to get into with this book, so everybody knows your story, and then there's a heroism to your story, and there's a heroism to you as a public figure. And a lot of our military, there's a heroism to what they've done. And I wanted to kind of subvert that a little bit with this book, because we have so few stories of what it's like to just be the guy on the ground trying to stay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just being the guy on the ground, the grunt on the ground trying to stay alive. What is that like? What is going through your mind? How do you experience that? We have so many stories from, like you were a Navy SEAL, and we have so many admirals and great heroic stories about people that were really leaders in charge. And I was like, okay, well, when I sat down to write this, I said, I wasn't in charge. I wasn't, I led, some of the privates behind me, but I wasn't a true leader. So how do I make this relatable to the average person? Because most of the people who will read this book will never serve in the military, will certainly never go to Iraq. You know what I mean? So how do I make this relatable to them? And I said, I make this relatable to them the same way that I make myself relatable to people when it comes to when I'm doing speeches or political commentary or whatever. Just take it down to the ground level.
Right.
And that's what I really try to do, because I look, Rob Smith is never going to be Dan Crenshaw. He's never going to be, all of these leaders that have that heroic sort of public.
Well, I don't think I have a heroic military history either. I think we do default way too much to simply calling veterans heroes. And I think we should reserve the term hero for some, I didn't save anybody from a burning, vehicle or anything. I just got hurt. And I suppose everybody serves heroically, I served honorably. I guess, but there isn't some single moment of heroism. I didn't act poorly when it was in the worst of times, I suppose. I got my ass up and walked it off. I guess that's the best that I can point to. But we overuse the word hero to a huge extent.
That's fair. And I certainly I like what you said about, I don't know if I'm a hero, but I definitely served honorably. That's all that I know. Never got an Article 15, never got arrested, never got anything like that. The only way I ever broke the law in the military was because I was gay. And everybody knows that law was BS anyway.
And then you did get arrested for it, didn't you? You did get arrested.
I got arrested after the fact. After the fact. And I'm like, I'm
protesting, right? This is after the military, just to be clear for all the listeners.
This was for everybody listening. So I got arrested protesting donuts outside the Obama White House afterwards. This was around 2010, which is funny because we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of that. And I was proud to do it. It was something that I felt very strongly about, because I know what it's like to be a closeted gay guy in the military. And when I look back at it, having to keep that secret kept me from building stronger relationships with my brothers. And I say brothers because I was in an infantry, this is an all-male unit. So it kept me from building a stronger relationship with them, because there was always something that I had to keep secret. And I eventually, and I talk about this in the book, I did come out to my best friend in the military, and some of these guys, and this is kind of a funny story, and that I talk about this in the book. My first kind of gay club was this place called Hide and Seek in Colorado Springs, Colorado, but I was under 21, couldn't get in until after 2 a.m., which means that they were no longer serving liquor. And then it became the after hours club, which everybody went to. Mm-hmm. So it was me there. And then I found some of the guys from my unit there, and I'm like, oh crap, you know, like, oh my God, they see me at this gay club. Like, I just better go pack my stuff. Like, they're going to kick me out. Like, it's going to be a whole big thing. And then those guys are like, nah, never turned me in, never did anything, just kept it moving.
Yeah. Well, you didn't tell, I guess. I don't know. It is, in hindsight, it is kind of a silly. What do you think about so what do you think about current military? Because it's the transgender issues become much more complicated from a military standpoint. And frankly, I think the current policy is just right. Basically what it is you can be transgender, but you have to act in your biological sense or in your biological sex. And that makes a ton of sense. So you show up to work one day, Rob, and now you're Robin. And then I say, okay, fine, get back to work. But you still have to take the male PT tests. You still have to dress in this uniform. Your behavior can't change. You can be who you are, but your behavior at work can't change. And I think, and also we cannot possibly pay for the reassignment surgeries that would also make you undeployable. And that just seems to be obvious, even though that's fought against by the left.
So it's really funny because I knew that this was going to come up. I didn't know it was going to come up now. So here's the thing about the transgender issue. And like, I consider myself very intelligent when it comes to this stuff, because people have to understand that when it comes to the transgender issue, there's medication, right? So people that are transgender are on some form of medication at all times. So either if you're male to female transgender, you're on hormones or estrogen. And if you're female to male transgender, you're on testosterone. There's just a lot of stuff that goes into that. Now, where it is, and I haven't dug down into where the policy is right now. I know that the policy is kind of like an outright ban, and I know that people are trying to fight it, and I know that, you know, this has become kind of a political thing. But fundamentally, we are talking about literally 1/3 of 1% of the population in general. And in the military, it is so much less than that. There are just so few people to which this would ever be an issue. So I don't know if I believe in an outright ban, and I don't know if I believe in just throwing it open so that everybody can do everything, because I say case in point. When I first went to Iraq, when I first deployed to Iraq, I went a month without a shower. Okay? So I went a month without a shower. Not only did I go a month without a shower, I went a month without, if there was some medication that I needed every single day for a month, it was not going to happen, right? So you can't have somebody that's deploying in a combat field that needs to have all of this medication every single day. Like, all this, it's not going to happen, right?
Right. I mean, we're not allowed to deploy if we haven't gotten our dental checks. You know, I mean, there's a pretty strong checklist of things that you have to have before you deploy. And so, I mean, from the medical side of it, it's a total non-starter. But you know what I wanted to ask you, that maybe direction I want you to go is kind of just thinking about generally anti-discrimination law. You know, the recent Supreme Court decision where it's a murky decision, but you're basically saying that somebody could show up to a funeral home, which is a sensitive place, and they were dressing up as a guy a minute ago, and now they refuse to, and they want to wear a dress, and they change their name, and they change their identity, even though they're still clearly a man, biologically speaking. You know, why can't that employer say, well, your behavior has changed? And I think this is the right way to think about anti-discrimination law, because I don't want people to be able to be fired for immutable characteristics. You know, and I think we all agree on that, because, and this gets into the debate the conservatives have, should political beliefs be a protected class? And I'm like, you know, it's interesting, but in the end, maybe not, because it's behavior. And I think you should always be able to get fired or not hired for behavior. And I think if we as a country just distinguished it that way, we'd be better off. So I can't fire you because you're transgender. But if you start to act a certain way, which is unbecoming of my place of employment, then I can fire you. And you know what I mean? I think that's probably the right way to think about it. But as I've tried to struggle with this, walking the line here, what do you think?
I mean, it's a struggle because on one hand, on one hand, you want to respect everybody. You want to respect everybody's decisions. But I know that in the case of this funeral home, if I am not mistaken, you know what? I'm not even going to get into that because I think that I don't know the details enough. We don't want to fire anybody for immutable characteristics. But at the same time, you want to make sure that people are fitting the standards of their jobs, and you don't want the workplace to become, people doing their activism. Right. And I think I have a chapter in the book. It's called literally escaping. It's called The Cult of LGBTQ, right? Mm-hmm. And so there are gays and there are lesbians and there are bisexuals and there are transgender people. And then there are people that are in the leftist LGBTQ cult. And so the people that are in the leftist LGBTQ cult think that whatever their characteristics are, whatever they identify as, that is the most important thing in the world. And we have to be careful about how much we sort of elevate that. Like, obviously, that's being elevated to a very high level in the left because they think that it helps them politically. Right. And they think that gays and lesbians and the LGBT community, that's another victim class for them. And that's why we're seeing all of the transgender stuff right now. Look, I think it's really sensitive. And when you get into that stuff, you also get into the fact that there are a lot of women right now, J.K. Rowling being the most famous example of which, that are being bashed by the left for standing up for female spaces and for standing up for women's sports. And I get into that in the Cult of LGBTQ chapter as well, is there are people that are really trying to destroy women's spaces. Yeah. And they're really trying to shut them up. And they're really trying to do that under the guise of inclusiveness. And that's the stuff that you really, really do have to be careful about when it comes to the transgender issue. When it comes to transgender issues, I always think, what are the rights of women that are being trampled upon? Because there is no threat at all for me. I'm a fully grown man. I work out 6 days a week. A female to male transgender in the changing room in my gym poses zero physical threat to me, and it never will. Mm-hmm. But you can't say that the other way around. Right. So we really have to be careful with that. And the party of science, right? The left loves to call themselves the party of science. All of that goes out of the door when they start talking about transgender issues. So that's a conversation that needs to be had with compassion, but it has to be rooted in biological reality.
Yeah, no, that's not how they do it. Everything's a social construct and can therefore be infinitely malleable. Yeah. Last question I want to get to you before we end is changing topics again. From one easy topic to the next, so you were on the left back when Black Lives Matter first came about. You transitioned to the right, and we're finding ourselves in this moment again. I mean, how has your thinking changed, evolved on this, and what are your and I asked you this before. We didn't really get to it. I mean, growing up as a black teenager, if you listen to BLM, you would think that every black teenager is constantly harassed by the police. Is this your experience? Do you think you have to have different conversations with your kids if they're black? How does what is true and what is not?
What is not true is the idea that because I'm a black man in the society, there are just roving packs of racist police officers that can't wait to kill me in the streets. Now, that's just not true, Danny. You know it's not true, and I know it's not true. And to a certain extent, the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement know it's not true as well. So a couple of years ago, when Black Lives Matter first started, I think that it was a movement that was about empowerment. I think it was a movement about, okay, like we really have to have some sort of reform. In the past couple of months, it has morphed into a political organization that is raising a lot of money for Democrats. And now that shift has happened, there's a shift towards the Black Lives Matter organization. And I always call it Black Lives Matter organization because this is not a movement. It is an organization. It is not a 501c3 nonprofit. They are getting millions and millions of dollars, not only from corporations, but a lot of this money is being funneled to the DNC as well. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we really have to talk about it in terms of this is a political organization that is being propped up by Democrats and being used to help elect Democrats. So we always have to.
No, the fact that they use Act Blue means that data is shared, and then fellow Democrats can use those same lists. That's how they do it, just so everybody understands how it works.
Yeah. And so it has become a political organization. And when it is now a political organization, it can now be criticized by everybody. Criticizing the Black Lives Matter organization doesn't mean that you're against Black people or against Black lives. And the Black Lives Matter organization certainly doesn't define my Blackness in the way that I live my life. And I would hope that a lot of these people aren't letting it define theirs. Now, when you have this conversation about the police, right, you ask me what my experience is like as a Black man living in America for over 30 years dealing with police. When I grew up, what I was taught by my mother and my father when he was around is that the police were your friends. That's what I was taught. I was taught that the police are your friends, that if you're not doing anything wrong, then you don't have anything to be afraid of. Now, as a Black man in society, how the society treats you changes as you start getting older, as you become a fully grown man. And so I've never had a true negative reaction with the police. I'll tell you a case in point. So I went to grad school at Columbia University, grad school of journalism. That degree is worthless. So I don't even know where it is right now. But
I wanted to ask about that if we had time, because I'm like, what the heck was that like?
Yeah, throw that degree in the trash. It's worthless. But in part of what I was doing for my studies, I was going out and I was filming some B-roll. So I'm on the train going downtown, or I'm filming some B-roll of just subway ads, whatever. White woman says, stop filming me. I said, I'm not filming you, I'm filming the ad. So she gets off the train at 96th Street. I am greeted by police officers at 14th Street because apparently this woman had called the cops. And so I look at these cops and they're coming towards me and I've got my camera. I'm obviously just doing work. And so I rolled my eyes and I was just like, hey guys, what's going on? They were like, yeah, we got a call. I was just like, look, this woman is giving me crap. It just is what it is. Like, I'm a guy at J school and like, I'm just trying to do my job. I'm not bothering anybody. And they were just like, yeah, like we see, have a good day. And that's all it was.
Yeah.
It wasn't intense. Now, had I came to that interaction with antagonistic energy,
totally,
and I had somebody filming me and I wanted to make a social media moment out of it, it would have probably been something a lot crazier than what it was. So the way I look at this policing conversation is, I think, and this is Black, white, Latino, Chinese, whatever, when you have the interaction, make sure it's de-escalated, and make sure it's de-escalated to the best of your ability, because when you de-escalate, they'll de-escalate.
Yeah. That's always what I was taught. I mean, with this notion that people are taught different things has always struck me as a little strange, depending on what skin color you are, because I was always taught to be extreme, like, a fearful respect is maybe the right way to describe that. And I think that's extremely healthy. Yes or no, sir. Like, no matter what, no arguing.
But a lot of these people don't. Number one, they don't have respect for authority. They've never been taught that because they don't have fathers in the home.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, it's real. I generally always had a little bit of respect of authority, but what gave me that respect for authority, like, that was being in the military. That's what I got from that. Yeah. And we don't have a lot of people that have respect for authority because they don't have authority. They don't have fathers in the home. That's why you have so many people acting out in so many crazy ways. When you look at these football coaches that are dealing with these super talented Black men that come from broken homes, never had dads, never had any respect for authority, the football coach has to become the de facto father figure.
Yeah.
And teach them that, and teach grown men that. So you have a lot of grown men that need to be taught these things because they're not taught them in the home, because there's no fathers in the home. And that is just the reality of the situation.
And it's interesting, the left kind of latches onto that reality and takes advantage of it and says, and they've moved a step further, because I don't think this would have been true even 10, 15 years ago, but they've moved a step further in their sort of postmodernist thinking and saying that authority, even as an institution, as an idea, is oppressive, and you shouldn't have to listen to it. So, I mean, they're constantly undercutting the foundations of success. Maybe that should be my next book, How the Left Undercuts the Foundations of Success. Great title. Just thought of it right now. But because it's true, whether it's personal responsibility or it's authority hierarchies, which, oh God, it sounds so scary, but they're important, and they're based on things like merit, as long as you base them on fairness and ethics and meritocracies, and they're deeply good things. I mean, empowerment, self-empowerment is a good thing. It's an element of success, and they actively undermine these things. And that's the thing. It's not that they just ignore them. They actively undermine them now. That's scary as hell.
Yeah. And, it's only going to get scarier, and it's only going to, it's only going to continue. But yeah, I guess this is something that I can get into. It hasn't been officially announced yet, but I really do want to invite everybody that is, hopefully if you've listened this far, I am an interesting person. I really want to invite them to follow me on all my social media platforms. I'm at Rob Smith Online everywhere, because I got a podcast of my own coming up, and it's I don't want to reveal the title. The title is great, but these are interesting. The conversations that we're having right now are very problematic, as the left would say, and I'm all about having problematic conversations. So hopefully they would join me when that podcast launches here in the next month or so.
All right. Well, everybody look for that new podcast coming up. That's at Rob Smith. Where are you most prominent? Twitter, Instagram,
at Rob Smith Online.
Just all of it. Okay. At Rob Smith Online.
Yep. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, at Rob Smith Online. So there's a lot more coming. And then for everybody, really appreciate you listening this far. Please go to Amazon or wherever books are sold. Buy my book, Always a Soldier, Service, Sacrifice, and Coming Out as America's Favorite Black Gay Republican is out now. So go check it out.
Well, that's awesome. And yeah, congratulations on the new book. I'm excited to see it. So, Rob, thanks so much for being on. It was a great conversation.
No, thanks for having me, Dan. And look, congratulations for all of your success. And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me.
Sounds good. No, thanks for being on.